Hello, everyone. In this second of 3 videos on essay structure, we're going to be talking about the body paragraph, going through guidelines and a sample body paragraph in the same way that we did in the first video. The body paragraph exists to develop one of your literary devices or main ideas and/or to provide support for the thesis, a reason from the story that your thesis is true. You're then going to use quotations and examples, specific evidence from the text, that you'll analyze in detail, drawing on specific elements of those quotations or of the story, language used, characters' actions and emotions, and the like, in order to support the main idea of that paragraph that in turn supports the thesis. When it comes to the overall purpose of an essay, you have an argument. That argument is supported by 3 ideas, the 3 paragraphs. Each main idea in one of those paragraphs is in turn supported by 3 supporting points as the argument inside that paragraph develops step by step. For the body paragraph, one of the most important things to remember is that you're not just proving the same thing 3 times. You don't just make a statement in the topic sentence and then give me 3 examples of that one idea. The body paragraph has to show forward movement. It has to develop an idea progressively, point by point, step by step, interpretation by interpretation. So if you make an argument or a claim in your topic sentence, it's not enough just to prove that claim 3 times. You have to lay the foundations for it, building that argument that is sufficiently complex to support a paragraph step by step, point by point. We'll take a look at how we do that in both the guidelines and the example that I provide you. The outline or guidelines for a body paragraph that I provide you here go through 4 elements. Element 1 is your topic sentence. Element 2 is supporting evidence from the text that is introduced using 1 or more signal phrases. Element 3 is analysis of evidence from the text. And element 4 is completion of the paragraph, which might not be needed strictly, depending on how you end element 3. Now, inside of a paragraph, you don't just have element 1, element 2, element 3, and then element 4, and you're done. No. In a paragraph, and this is critical, you have element 1, your topic sentence, and then you alternate back and forth between elements 2 and 3 2 to 3 times. So this is your 2 to 3 examples, your 2 to 3 analyzed and integrated quotations. So, element 1, a topic sentence, the first sentence, that states this paragraph's argument and how you'll prove it. In an essay, you have to make sure that there's a clear, smooth transition between your points. It's not sufficient simply to state the argument of this paragraph. That idea has to proceed in some way, has to follow from the ideas that you've already explored in the essay. It can't just appear as this random new supporting point. There has to be an evolution, paragraph by paragraph, argument by argument in the essay, such that if I had paragraph 2, there's something in there, in that argument in the topic sentence, that I needed paragraph 1 in order to establish. I'm building an argument step by step. If you take anything away from this video, it's that. The essay as a whole and the body paragraph as an individual part of the essay are all about building an argument, point by point, example by example, step by step, so that paragraph 1 is needed for you to get to paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 wouldn't make sense without paragraph 1 as the initial groundwork for paragraph 2. In turn, inside paragraph 1, point 2, your second example in that paragraph, wouldn't make sense without point 1, or the example 1 that you're using and what you argue about it and through it. You'll see examples of this when we move to that sample body paragraph. Each topic has to be relevant in some way to the thesis statement. So there's some way, logically, I can see a connection between the ideas you're developing in the topic sentence and what it is you're going to be arguing in the whole essay, your thesis. Everything in the paragraph has to be relevant to the topic sentence's claim. So, as you're running through or reviewing your paragraph, you're making certain that every single element therein, every point that you make, every example that you give, every point of analysis that you offer is relevant to the thesis. This is true in the paragraph as a whole, and it's particularly true in the thesis, in the topic sentence. Element 2. And remember again, we're alternating in the paragraph between element 2, element 3, element 2, element 3, element 2, element 3, then element 4 to close it off. Element 2, provide supporting evidence from the text that is introduced using 1 or more signal phrases. So you need to introduce, integrate, and analyze your quotation. Provide a quotation to support all of your claims about the text. Clarify the quotation's context. So tell me, as you introduce the quotation, who is speaking? Is it the narrator? Is it a character? What's the context? When you do that, you're just reminding the reader, hey, remember in the story when, I don't know, Luke Skywalker had his hand chopped off by Darth Vader? Spoilers for a 40-year-old movie. You're just telling your reader, remember this moment. That's the moment I'm talking about. That's the moment I'm going to be analyzing, and that's where you can look up this quotation if you want to check what I'm talking about. Ensure the quotation's length is appropriate. Use ellipses to leave words out. This is critical because you don't want to waste space. You want to take only as much of the quotation as you need to prove your point. So if you can cut something out of the quotation, avoid using it to summarize the story, and just focus on the part that you really need to analyze, your essay will be far more tight, compact, focused, and concise for it, and thus all the more powerful. Quotations have to be integrated and introduced using full sentences, and you'll notice that this point is bold because it's one of the things that I most often see done poorly or done incorrectly in the context of student essays. Quotations can't simply stand alone. You can't have your sentence and then open quotation marks, provide the quotation of the story, close quotation marks, and give your citation. That quotation needs to be integrated into your own sentence. You need to have a signal phrase like the narrator says, or Cassio says, comma, and then the quotation. Or you need to have a separate sentence connected to the quotation using a colon, for instance. These issues of quotation integration will be handled when we move on to quotation analysis in future classes, but it's something to keep in mind even now, particularly as we move forward. Use direct quotations as possible. They are the best form of evidence. Don't summarize. Don't paraphrase. Use the exact specific language that's used in the story, because then you can actually grapple with the specific word choices that the author is using. That is in-depth, focused analysis. If you could highlight the use of a particular word or group of words, a phrase, and use that as the basis for an argument, you're showing me that you can analyze the text in depth, paying attention to those fine details. So, use direct quotations rather than generalized statements. And cite quotations correctly using in-text references. After a quotation, you need to analyze it. You need to show me how this quotation is relevant to the argument that you're making. So state what the quotation means interpretively, even if it is obvious to you, and why or how you know the quotation supports your argument. So if you make a claim and you want to use a quotation to prove that claim, you need to explain not what the quotation means literally, not what happens literally, but what's going on behind the surface, what the quotation means interpretively. So for instance, if a teacher arranges to have a meeting with you in the context of a story, the teacher is approached by a student, the student wants to speak to him, and he's incredibly busy, but he makes time for the student and says, you know what, I'll come in after class, even though I have this other appointment, I'll rearrange my schedule to make sure that I can meet with you and help you with the problem that you're having. Now, it's not stated directly in that quotation that that's a good teacher, or the teacher cares about his students. But we can analyze that moment in the story and say, well, because the teacher is willing to sacrifice for his student, he clearly cares very much for that student. Or you can recontextualize it and analyze it in a different way, depending on the particular events in the story. The point is, you're not stating in your analysis of that event what happened. Well, the teacher made time for the student. You're telling me something about the teacher and how he is characterized. And this is true not just for quotations about characterization. It's true for any kind of analysis, particularly symbolic analysis. When you're looking at how a symbol is represented and how we know what the symbol represents or what it means based on word choice and context. That analysis has to be relevant to your point. It has to be relevant to proving your overall argument. Offer analysis that's original, nuanced, logical, and precise. Do not reiterate the literal meaning of the quotation, but make sure your argument is logical. Make sure that you don't just state, well, the teacher cares about his student. How do you know that? You have to explain, well, it's because he makes time for the student and decides that he's going to rearrange his schedule that it's clear he cares a great deal about his students. Oh, that makes sense. That's logically explained. So when you take a quotation, make sure that you are building the argument, building the interpretation step by step within that one small part of the body paragraph. It's a logical, fully developed claim and support for the claim using an explanation. Avoid summary unless it's relevant to the text or to your analysis. Don't repeat what happens in the story literally. Only have that one half sentence to introduce the quotation to say, hey, remember when in the story this happened? That's where the quotation comes from. Lastly, part 4, you may not require it, but possibly offer a restatement of the topic sentence's claim at the end of the paragraph if it has become lost. If, however, your point remains clear at the end of, your third example of element 2, element 3, element 2, element 3, element 2, element 3, your argument seems tied up, you don't necessarily need to have a final sentence that restates the argument of the paragraph. I've just gone through this paragraph, you've developed your argument, you've built it, and you've proven it, hopefully using those as 3 examples, so I don't need to have you restate it. This element 4 is a judgment call on your part. Do you actually need it? If so, include it. If you don't, and you think your argument is clear, then leave it off. There is, after this set of guidelines, a sample body paragraph. In fact, there are several sample body paragraphs that would fill out a full essay. These body paragraphs include numbers that illustrate elements 2 and 3, element 2, element 1, and the like. So it breaks down the body paragraph based on the criteria or of the guidelines. So let's take a look at one of these paragraphs, and then I'd like you to conduct an activity involving the second body paragraph that is posted on Omnivox, where you'll take that paragraph and break it down into its constituent elements, labeling it using element 1, element 2, element 3, and element 4. What is analysis? What is evidence? What is argument? And the like. Building on the thesis statement that we had in that sample introduction from the previous video, both the narrator and his sister Irene rely on the fruits of their inheritance, and so they've subconsciously shaped their entire lives around defending and maintaining tradition. Now, if you look at the relationship between this topic sentence and the thesis statement, this is not really a supporting argument for the thesis, right? It doesn't provide an argument that, if proven, would prove the entire thesis. Instead, I'm building the argument in that thesis point by point. And the first thing that I think to myself that I have to prove, that I have to show in this essay is, well, the characters are governed by tradition. They shape their entire lives around tradition. So I'm making an argument about the characters that will establish something in the first paragraph that I can build on as I move into the second paragraph and use as a point to develop the full argument of the thesis. So the thesis isn't proven 3 times in 3 body paragraphs. Instead, that argument in the thesis develops point by point, paragraph by paragraph, until by the end of the essay, I have had this forward movement from, here's my argument, here's the first point that I need to establish to make my argument in my first paragraph, here's the second point that I need to prove to make my argument in the second paragraph, and then using all that information, building on it, I've used those as stepping stones to the third most complex argument, and then by the end of it, I've proven my overall argument. So let's take a quick look at the other 2 topic sentences in order to get a sense of how that's done. Remember that our argument was that the attempt to defend tradition ultimately causes people to live stagnant lives, and thus they become enslaved and entrapped by tradition. Okay, so my first argument in that overarching argument, my first sort of supporting idea for the full essay, based on that thesis. Both the narrator and his sister Irene rely on the fruits of their inheritance, and so they have subconsciously shaped their entire lives around defending and maintaining tradition. Okay, all I've proven, or all I will prove in this paragraph, is that they shape everything about their lives around tradition. All right. Building on that argument, I move to paragraph 2. This pervasive inclination leads them to perpetuate traditions even when they no longer serve any purpose, reducing their actions to the level of trivial farce. So I've established what they do. They build all their lives around tradition in the first paragraph. Now I take that idea and I take it one step further to take me one step closer to proving the entire thesis. This pervasive inclination, the fact that everything they do is oriented around defending and maintaining and surviving based on tradition, is something that reduces their lives to a trivial farce. It makes their lives seem ridiculous. They maintain and defend traditions even though they're farcical and nonsensical. Okay, so I'm getting that idea of stagnation. I've taken one step forward in proving that argument, paragraph by paragraph. The third argument in paragraph 3 is such investment in tradition for its own sake inspires personal stagnation and in turn vulnerability. Third point, and now when I take those three ideas together, the three topic sentences, I've proven the thesis. I didn't prove it 3 times, but I had a more complex argument that I built logically step by step with in-depth focused analysis in each paragraph. Now, let's turn back, now that we have this sense of how the overarching argument develops, to that first paragraph and see how that paragraph employs the guidelines that I provided. So we have our main idea, the argument or the principal idea that is going to carry through this paragraph. Both the narrator and his sister Irene rely on the fruits of their inheritance, and so they have subconsciously shaped their entire lives around defending and maintaining tradition. So I'm going to try to prove through this essay, or through this paragraph I should say, that these two characters build their entire lives around tradition. The narrator acknowledges that he and his sister didn't have to earn a living. There was plenty coming in from the farms each month, even piling up. Cortazar 2. Now, obviously, in a full essay, you wouldn't have element 2 and element 1. I'm just keeping those there so that you know what parts of the essay are what. Element 2 there is evidence. I've given you some information about the text, and now I'm going to analyze it and develop an interpretation of that quotation step by step logically. Living off of the accumulated holdings of the past, brother and sister depend on inheritance for existence. Okay? Well, I've started proving the first point of my main idea here. They rely on their inheritance. Can I now, using other examples, fill out the rest of the argument, the complex argument in this paragraph? I'm not proving everything in the topic sentence with one example. Instead, I'm proving a part of it and then building on that so I can have this complex, robust argument that develops through the paragraph. And so I have another example of a smooth transition between these 2 points. It is precisely this fact that molds their responses to tradition as embodied by their home. So it's kind of like a claim or a transition from my first claim, my first point, to my second one. So I go back to elements 2 and 3. But in this case, I have another way of doing it. Instead of having one sentence that's element 2 and one sentence that's element 3, I'm merging the two together. So I have both inside the same sentence. They love the house, not for any practical reasons, but for the very fact that it is old and keeps the memory of their great grandparents, paternal grandparents, parents, and the whole of their children. Okay. The home offers comfort and security because it connects them to their past and instantiates their family history physically, the two things on which they rely for their survival. So I have my example or my evidence for this claim that I've just made in the smooth transition, and then I analyze the quotation. The fact that they say, well, it keeps the memories of their great-grandparents and paternal grandfather, parents, and the whole of their childhood alive. What does that mean? What does that tell us? Well, it tells us, interpretively, I can analyze that quotation to say, the home offers comfort and security because it connects them to their past. It instantiates, it's like a physical embodiment of their family history, the two things on which they rely for survival. They rely on their traditional holdings. It's subconsciously shaped all their lives. Here I have a transition and element 2 put together. This reliance on the past creates in the siblings a subconscious obsession with tradition for its own sake and explains their desire to topple the house before it was too late so that they can never be appropriated by distant cousins. Okay, so that's my evidence and kind of my claim. It's this attachment tradition that leads to these desires. It is better to obliterate the family legacy once it can no longer serve the interests of that legacy, the close rather than the distant family, than to allow it to be defiled. These distant cousins are such not only on genetic terms, but also on spiritual ones, their outlook and relationship with the home as an embodiment of the traditional associations and beliefs of the clan. They must be prevented from defiling the traditional holdings of the narrator's family line. So it's, again, this subconscious need to defend tradition and maintain traditions. The very reason that they are fighting against their family members is that they want to defend their tradition. They want to defend the home that's an embodiment symbolically of their traditions. Okay. As a consequence of this ingrained need to protect and preserve tradition, qua tradition, tradition, as I stated in the topic sentence, the siblings have allowed their entire being to become defined by the maintenance of tradition. Every day allows involves an identical pattern. We rose at 7 in the morning and got the cleaning done, and about 11 I left Irene to finish off whatever rooms and went to the kitchen. We lunched at noon precisely, and then there was nothing left to do but a few dirty dishes. So that's an example, it's evidence, and my analysis of that evidence is they have patterned their entire lives around the subconscious desire to maintain tradition, which manifests in their all-consuming routine, tradition writ small. So routine is like tradition, it follows the same pattern. You're just doing the same thing over again. You're carrying this traditional pattern of behavior into the future. So we see that we built this argument about they rely on the fruits of inheritance. That's kind of my first point in the paragraph. So they've subconsciously shaped their entire lives around defending and maintaining it. And I give two examples of that in two different spheres, that it's what they do on the broad brushstrokes of their lives, but it actually goes down all the way to the specific nitty-gritty details of how they live each day. There's a progressive developing argument in this paragraph, and that's complex and difficult to maintain and to convey. But it's a far more subtle and effective means of forward-moving argumentation than simply stating the same thing using three different examples. What I'd like you to do now is to take the sample body paragraph 2 that I have posted on Omnivox. I want you to do what I've done here, labeling different things as element 1, element 2, or you might say evidence, examples, and analysis of that evidence. Get some practice, and then take a look at the sample second and third paragraphs that I have in this essay. You'll be able to use them to compare your answers to mine and to see this difference, or to become a little bit more familiar with the difference between evidence analysis and how we parse them out. Because understanding how to identify them in another person's work will also help you to employ them properly in the context of your body paragraphs. Now, just a few points about things to be aware of in body paragraphs for your essays. First of all, your essay, introduction, conclusion, body paragraphs, and everything you write should be in the present tense. When you're talking about what's happening in the story, talk about it as if the story is happening at this very moment. Make sure that you're following MLA format for quotations, and you must integrate quotations into full sentences. Things that you should avoid when you're writing your essay and your body paragraphs in particular: avoid overly complex words. Be as complex as you need to convey your argument precisely and concisely. No more complex than that. Avoid using many words when few words will do. Avoid using expressions or slang. You shouldn't use the first person, or I should say the first or second person, I, you, or we. Avoid using contractions. Always use cannot instead of can't, does not instead of don't, etc. Avoid mechanical phrasing. This issue particularly arises in the context of introducing and analyzing quotations. You never, ever want to say, this quotation shows X, or to write this quotation, in the following quotation, we see, etc. You always want to state them without those signaling phrases. In the next video, we're going to take a look at conclusions.